in this city for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The smell alone tells me something's not right, and I don't mean infection or decay. I mean wrong in a way that makes your skin crawl. Dr. Richardson began compiling a quiet dossier: death certificates, witness statements, letters from grieving families. He wasn't alone in his suspicion. Several nurses who had briefly worked at St. Mercy left suddenly, refusing to speak about what they'd seen. One anonymous letter mailed to Richardson's office claimed that the basement chambers were not places of healing, but of offering. By 1880, whispers had begun to circulate beyond the Irish quarter. A Protestant minister, Reverend Thomas Blackwood, published a scathing pamphlet questioning the hospital's methods and warning of pagan rites. Cloaked in Catholic vestments, the diocese responded swiftly, publicly defending the hospital and accusing Reverend Blackwood of anti-Catholic bigotry. Privately, however, senior church officials began quietly distancing themselves from Dr. Whitman and his team. Then, in 1883, everything began to unravel. A young novice nun named Sister Angela was admitted to St. Mercy for what her convent believed was tuberculosis. After undergoing days of basement treatment, she disappeared. The convent demanded answers. The hospital claimed she had died peacefully and had already been buried, but no burial records could be found, and no priest recalled conducting a funeral mass. The convent contacted church authorities, who in turn reached out to Boston officials. An investigation was launched, though it was deliberately low profile to avoid public panic. Inspectors arrived under the pretense of a routine health inspection, but they weren't prepared for what they found. The hospital's upper floors were in acceptable condition, but the basement was sealed off. When officials demanded entry, Dr. Whitman resisted, citing sanctity and divine protocol. It took nearly a week and a formal court order before the basement doors were unlocked. What they found inside shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The so-called sacred treatment chambers were lined with dark marble and brass fittings, lit only by flickering oil lamps. Strange symbols were etched into the wall, some Christian, others unrecognizable. In one chamber, they found rows of restraints attached to medical tables, stained with substances that tested positive for both blood and ash. Another room contained shelves of handwritten journals by Dr. Whitman, filled with references to vessels of purity, sacramental trials, and ritual convergence. Most disturbing of all was a final, locked room containing 17 small coffins. Inside were the bodies of children, all badly decomposed, all with blackened fingernails and signs of internal organ damage inconsistent with their reported causes of death. None had been embalmed, and all bore a faint, sweet-rotten odor that matched earlier witness descriptions. The hospital was shut down within 24 hours. Dr. Whitman vanished before he could be arrested. Sister Margaret O'Connor and Chaplain Sullivan were taken into custody, but both refused to speak during interrogation. Sister Margaret died of apparent heart failure a week later, and Sullivan was found unresponsive in his cell, having swallowed a page from one of Whitman's journals. The Catholic diocese moved quickly to seal all hospital records. Official statements referred to unfortunate incidents, and the church denied any involvement. But by then, the damage had been done. A few investigators managed to copy portions of the journals and patient files before they were confiscated. Those documents, the same ones discovered in 1891 when officials reopened the morgue, revealed that 213 patients had died under almost identical circumstances. Each death file carried the same final notation: called to glory during sacred treatment. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened inside St. Mercy's basement chambers. Some believe Dr. Whitman was a misguided fanatic experimenting with radical therapies. Others insist the hospital had become a front for occult rituals masked in religious symbolism. A few go further, suggesting that some force divine or otherwise had indeed been summoned and demanded something in return. The basement of St. Mercy General Hospital was sealed for good in 1892. The building was later demolished, and a city park now stands where it once loomed. But on certain foggy nights, locals claim to hear the faint echo of hymns drifting from beneath the ground, and the soft footsteps of someone or something walking just beneath the earth. So, what do you think? Was St. Mercy a place of healing, deception, or something far darker? Let us know in the comments. And if stories like this intrigue you, if you're not afraid to explore the hidden side of history, subscribe for more. Because the past is never really gone, it's just waiting to be uncovered. European pharmaceutical syndicate using St. Mercy General Hospital as a front for unethical drug trials. The so-called miracles were simply rare cases where experimental compounds worked without killing the patient. The files, the lab equipment, the hidden rooms, it was all part of a larger machine built to generate data, sell results, and discard the human cost. It had nothing to do with healing, faith, or charity. Father Benedetti stayed hidden until the voices faded, and the footsteps moved deeper into the basement. When the moment felt right, he slipped out through the window he had entered, camera and documents in hand, and vanished into the night. He immediately sent his evidence to trusted contacts within the Vatican and the Boston press. But what followed wasn't the swift closure or arrests he hoped for. Within a week, St. Mercy General Hospital caught fire under mysterious circumstances. The entire building, including all physical records, was reduced to ash. No arrests were made, no bodies were recovered. The official story was an electrical fire caused by faulty wiring. The Catholic diocese expressed sorrow, but defended the hospital's legacy. Bishop Williams called it a tragic loss for the community. While subtly warning against speculative rumors, Father Benedetti returned to Rome shortly after. His investigation effectively buried, under layers of denial, legal protection, and bureaucratic inaction. His report was sealed and placed in the Vatican archives, where it remains to this day, classified and inaccessible to the public. Mrs. Catherine O'Malley, shaken but undeterred, continued to speak quietly to those willing to listen. Some believed her, others dismissed her claims as grief-fueled paranoia. But those who had seen what she'd seen never forgot the look in her eyes when she said, "They didn't die of sickness. They were used." The truth about St. Mercy General Hospital was never officially acknowledged, but it lives on in whispered stories passed down through families, in missing persons records that never added up, and in the faint echoes of those basement chambers where faith, science, and greed collided. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want to hear your thoughts. What do you believe happened beneath the surface of St. Mercy? Let me know in the comments. And if you're drawn to the forgotten corners of history where records fade and truth gets buried, make sure to subscribe. There's more to uncover, and more stories that need to be told. The syndicate behind it all was made up of European pharmaceutical companies, willing to pay enormous sums for human testing data. They couldn't get through legal channels. The hospital was never truly about healing. It was a cover for human experimentation, using faith to manipulate the most vulnerable. What about Benedetti? Dr. Whitman asked, clearly growing nervous. If he finishes his report and sends it to Rome, the church will call for an investigation. We'll be exposed and we'll all be facing murder charges. The woman's reply froze Father Benedetti in place. He won't finish the investigation. Tomorrow night, he'll volunteer for sacred treatment just like the others. We'll record it as a tragic reaction during prayer, a divine calling. Another martyr added to the legend of St. Mercy. And how do you plan to convince him? Whitman asked. Sister Margaret has been slipping low doses of our compounds into the communion wine at St. Leonard's for weeks. Benedetti's been drinking it without realizing. By tomorrow, he'll be disoriented enough to agree to treatment. Once sedated and in the basement, he'd be given the same lethal dose as all the other patients who had asked too many questions. Benedetti knew then. He had maybe 12 hours left to escape with the evidence and alert the authorities. But as he turned to make his way back to the basement window, his foot knocked into a metal container. The sharp clang echoed through the chamber. Silence upstairs. Then, Whitman's voice floated down, soft, cold, and controlled. Father Benedetti, there's no need to hide. We know what you found. Come upstairs. Let's talk like civilized men. His only chance now was to run. He grabbed the files and photographs he'd collected and bolted toward the window, praying his body could still handle the urgency. As he climbed out, he heard footsteps rushing down the stairs and then the unmistakable sound of a rifle being loaded. They were coming for him, Benedetti ran through the dark alleys of Boston's North End, clutching the evidence. His destination, the office of Dr. Samuel Richardson, the one man who had doubted the miracles. From the very beginning, before sunrise, they pored over the photos and documents together. "These aren't random tests," Richardson said, flipping through the patient files. "This is industrial-scale pharmaceutical research. Look at the dosages they were pushing them to lethal limits. And these chemicals, some aren't even known in U.S. labs. They were importing this stuff." The documents also named other locations, warehouses and addresses that stored chemical supplies, and medical records tied to the operation. Facilities in Vienna, Berlin, and London were mentioned, each one using poor or isolated communities as guinea pigs. They had to act fast. If they went straight to the authorities, the conspirators might destroy the evidence and disappear. Instead, they planned simultaneous raids on the hospital and the storage facilities. At 6 a.m. on October 9, 1881, Father Benedetti handed over his report to Bishop Williams, while Dr. Richardson contacted city police and federal investigators. The timing was chosen to intercept staff during the morning shift change before anyone could flee. What the raids uncovered stunned even the investigators. Hidden beneath the hospital was a sub-basement with preservation tanks full of human organs, detailed surgical records, and letters from buyers across Europe, medical schools and labs who didn't ask where the bodies came from. This wasn't just drug testing. It was organ harvesting. Dr. Klaus Weissman, operating under the name Dr. Charles Whitman, was arrested trying to burn files in his office. Margaret Osborne, aka Sister Margaret, was caught at the harbor attempting to flee with patient records and vials of experimental compounds. Robert Steinberg, the fake chaplain, escaped briefly, but was caught days later in New York trying to board a ship under his real name. The evidence linked them to an international network that had been operating for nearly 20 years, using churches, orphanages, and charity hospitals to carry out illegal human experimentation across 3 continents. Exhumations from the hospital's cemetery revealed coffins filled with animal remains or nothing at all. Human bodies had been shipped overseas for further study or disposed of without trace. For families who thought their loved ones died naturally, the truth was shattering. The patients hadn't been healed or comforted. They'd been used, experimented on, and discarded. The few who had actually recovered, like Patrick O'Malley, were left to wrestle with a terrible reality. Was my life a miracle or just luck? He asked Father Benedetti. How do I live knowing others died so I could be saved? The public outcry led to major changes in both the church and medical regulation. The Catholic Church instituted stricter checks on religious hospitals, and U.S. authorities passed new laws requiring documentation and transparency for any medical testing on humans. St. Mercy General Hospital was demolished in 1882. For over 30 years, nothing was built on the site. Locals believed the ground itself was cursed. Eventually, it became a public park with a plaque that reads, "In memory of those who sought healing and found death, may their suffering remind us to question those who claim divine authority over human life." Dr. Klaus Weissman was executed in 1883. Until his final breath, he insisted that his work had saved more lives than it cost. Margaret Osborne died in prison in 1901, still claiming she had only wanted to help people. Robert Steinberg died of tuberculosis in 1893, the same disease he had once pretended to cure. Father Benedetti returned to Rome and dedicated the rest of his life to reforming the Church's process for investigating miracles. His guidelines are still used by the Vatican today, but perhaps the darkest legacy of St. Mercy was the discovery that similar operations had quietly emerged in other cities, each preying on a different group, each using faith and trust to mask cruel intentions. Historians and researchers have studied the case for decades. The records, preserved through Benedetti's efforts, revealed in disturbing detail how people's belief in healing, in goodness, in divine protection was turned against them. The St. Mercy case remains one of the clearest examples of how institutions can exploit faith when left unchecked, and how the pursuit of progress or profit can sometimes cross into outright evil. 213 victims died thinking they were being healed. never knowing they were being used. And that's the part that still haunts. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with this difficult story. These kinds of hidden truths matter. If it shook you the way it shook me, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and help spread awareness. And if you want to keep exploring stories like this where history and mystery overlap, subscribe and join the conversation, because sometimes the most terrifying truths aren't found in horror novels. They're buried in real history.